They prayed over bones that were not their own. They buried their dead with relics stolen from churches that no longer stand. And for 3 centuries, the Dunmore family believed they were untouchable, until every prayer was answered at once. Tonight, we open their graves, and what we find inside is not silence. The hill rises slowly in the frame. A gentle fog drapes across its shoulders, and there, at the crown, a house stands. Not a manor, not a home, but a mausoleum. The estate at Dunmore Hill looks less like it was built, and more like it was raised, dragged up from the earth by something that did not want it seen. Its walls do not align in the manner of careful architecture. Instead, they strain against one another, a patchwork of stone that feels older than the hill itself. The closer you look, the more disquieting it becomes. The foundations are not cut evenly. They are rough-hewn, taken from ruins that predate the village below. Some of the stones still carry carvings, symbols too worn to read. Others, fractured slabs that once formed an altar, are now stacked into chimneys. The people of Dunmore whisper that even the mortar was darkened, that it was mixed with blood. At first, it sounds like folklore, a tale passed from parent to child, meant to keep children from wandering too close to the hill after dusk. But then you notice how consistently the story is told. The details never change. It is always the same words. Blood from the chapel. Blood from the land. The Dunmore family had taken what was sacred and forced it into the bones of their house. In the late light of autumn, the house casts no warm glow. Its windows look like sockets, empty to purpose. When the wind presses against the hill, the shutters do not clap shut like other homes. They rattle almost like teeth. But something wasn't right. If you stood at the edge of the village square, you could see the house staring down. And though the hill stretched near half a mile away, there was always a sensation that someone inside was looking back. The house did not blend into the skyline. It cut through it. Even the trees did not want to grow near its walls. Their branches swerved outward, leaning away, as if repelled by the stone itself. Roots ran shallow. Grass yellowed in patches. A circle of dry earth encircled the property, like a scar. Locals said this was proof enough. No house built from holy stone could nourish the living. The first recorded account of the estate comes from 1762. Parish records note a new dwelling erected on the hill, the deed signed by the first of the Dunmore line. At that time, the ruined chapel had already been abandoned for decades. Its roof caved in, its altar splintered. Yet, within weeks of stones being moved, the village reported a smell. Not rot, not smoke, but iron. It drifted down from the hill, faint but constant, a metallic tang, sharp on the tongue, like coins pressed against the teeth. Children spat it out when the wind blew strong. Women closed shutters against it. Men spoke of it in the tavern, but avoided saying it aloud at church, because it was the smell of blood. The Dunmore family themselves rarely appeared in the village. Their wealth kept them isolated. Carriages brought provisions up the hill, but no villager was invited to see the house from within. And yet everyone knew its walls. When lightning split the sky, the stones seemed to flare. The faint outline of crosses, once chiseled deep, glimmered in negative. What had once sanctified a chapel now clung like scars to a house. There was no denying it. The Dunmores had built their home with stolen relics. And that was only the beginning. Travelers passing through Dunmore often remarked on the silence of the estate. No dog barked within its grounds. No rooster crowed at dawn. Even the crows circled wide, never landing on its roof. But what most unsettled them was how sound seemed to vanish. If a cart creaked on the road, the noise thinned near the gates. If voices carried up the slope, they fell into hush as if swallowed by the stone itself. The house did not echo. It absorbed. One man, a visiting mason, wrote in his diary that standing before the walls was like praying into a tomb where the stone listens but does not reply. He did not stay the night. Over time, the villagers grew accustomed to their unease. They avoided looking too long at the hill. They timed their errands to the market when the fog was thickest, so the house would vanish behind its veil. But children do not always obey. They told stories of running up the lower slope, daring each other to touch the gates. One boy swore he placed his palm against the iron only to feel warmth. Not the warmth of sunlit metal, but something pulsing, like the beat of a heart. He never touched it again. The elders warned them. Stone remembers. Blood remembers more. It was said that in taking the chapel stones, the Dunmores had not just stolen matter, but meaning. They had carried up sanctity. They had carried up sacrifice. And when sanctity is broken, sacrifice lingers. The house at Dunmore Hill became more than architecture. It became a vessel, not a church, not a dwelling. Something in between, but nothing consecrated, nothing blessed. The villagers did not speak openly of curses. But when livestock failed without wound, when milk spoiled in jars or the air was cool, when stillbirths darkened the parish records, their eyes always drifted to the hill. They whispered that the house was not cursed. It was consecrated, just not by them. At night, lanterns burned inside, but never in pairs. Always a single glow, moving from window to window, slowly, patiently, like a man carrying a candle, searching for something he could not find. Years passed. The family line continued, but the stories did not fade. They grew heavier. Each generation of villagers added their own detail, that the stone still wept when it rained, that the foundation bled when dug too close, that every visitor left with a fever that did not break. None of these claims could be proven, and yet no one doubted them. The hill itself seemed to demand belief. Standing at its base, one could not help but feel it, a pressure at the temples, a weight on the chest, the sense that the house was not watching from above, but pressing downward, bearing down, like a mausoleum. And still, the family lived there. Even as the village shrank, even as homes emptied and shops closed, the estate remained occupied. Always one more Dunmore, always another carriage, always that single light moving from room to room, until the night it went dark. No lantern, no carriage, only the house, silent, waiting. And for the first time in over a century, the village realized something. It wasn't the Dunmores who had endured, it was the house. The camera drifts down into shadow. Stone walls, damp, silent, and inside the parish archive, a ledger. Its pages are brittle. Edges curl with the weight of candle smoke and time. But the words still hold, ink pressed in a hand, careful, deliberate, unwilling to forget what it recorded. The entries describe the Dunmore family, not in gossip, not in whispers, but in the plain record of the church itself. They did not only build their house from broken stones, they gathered relics, bones, fragments of altars, crucifixes washed in the blood of plague victims, taken not for reverence, not for prayer, but for burial. Each was placed in family coffins, not beside the dead, but with them, pressed into fingers, laid across chests, arranged in silence beneath the soil, charms against damnation. That is what the record says. But something wasn't right. The relics were not theirs to hold. They had been pried from crypts, lifted from plague pits, carried away from altars that once stood on consecrated ground. They had belonged to the church. They had belonged to the dead. And now, they belonged to the Dunmores. The practice began quietly. A chalice from a ruined parish. A sliver of bone labeled in Latin as the finger of a martyr. A fragment of wood, burned at the edge, said to be from a pyre of heretics. Each one carried down the hill. Each one disappeared into the estate. The parish ledger notes them, because priests complained. They wrote of missing reliquaries, of disturbed graves. They whispered of theft, but the handwriting grows more hesitant each year. Fewer complaints, fewer notes, until finally only silence. It was as though even the priests no longer dared to accuse, because the Dunmores were not ashamed. They paraded their relics in funerals. The processions wound through the village, carriages draped in black, coffins lifted high. The mourners moved slow, deliberate, as if enacting a rite known only to them. And when the coffins passed, the villagers glimpsed what lay inside, bone wrapped in velvet, wood splintered and dark. A crucifix modeled, not with paint, but with blood that no cloth could wash away. These were not tokens of faith. They were trophies, and the family spoke openly of why. They did not fear death. They feared judgment. To lie beneath the soil they believed was to be summoned, to be called up on the day of reckoning. And the relics, martyrs, saints, plague victims, were insurance. They would rise shielded, not by their own deeds, but by the suffering of others. The villagers began to turn their faces when the coffins passed. Mothers held their children back. Men lowered their hats. No one wanted to see the relics in that way, because even then they understood something had been broken. The church had relics for veneration. The Dunmores had relics for possession. It was not the same. One was devotion, the other was theft, and yet the practice grew. Each generation collected more. Each coffin required another. Soon the family vault swelled with objects that should never have left the altars where they had been placed. One record notes a crucifix taken from a convent struck by plague. The nuns who died there had clutched it in their last moments, their breaths shallow, their hands fevered. The cross had been soaked with their blood, darkened by their last prayer, and yet it was buried with a Dunmore. Another record describes bones unearthed from beneath a collapsed chapel. Labeled in haste, they had once been kept in a reliquary gilded with gold. Villagers swore they saw the family carry them into the stake wrapped in cloth, as if they were no more than firewood. But perhaps the most disturbing entry comes in 1824. It describes a coffin lowered into a vault with an altar stone inside, heavy, cracked, still bearing the carved grooves where oil had once run during Mass. That altar had consecrated generations of worship, and now it sealed the corpse of a Dunmore. The priests who wrote this entry ended their note with a single sentence: "The dead do not pray for the living." But the Dunmores did not believe it. They believed the opposite, that suffering was currency, that holiness could be hoarded, that the weight of relics pressed against their chests would tilt the scales of judgment. It was never spoken as heresy. It was spoken as certainty. But something wasn't right. Those who worked near the estate began to notice. Grave diggers whispered of coffins that weighed far more than they should. One claimed he strained his back lifting a casket, so heavy he believed there were stones inside. He was told never to speak of it again. Masons hired to repair the family vault described the same. They wrote of coffins that rang when struck, as though iron lay beneath the wood. They wrote of dust that clung to their hands, gritty, bone-like, and they wrote of the silence. Inside the vault, their hammers did not echo. Their words did not carry. The air felt thick, as though the relics themselves absorbed sound. The church never sanctioned these burials, but they never stopped them either. And with each generation, the collection grew, until the vault became a reliquary of its own. Not holy, not sanctified, but filled with bones and blood and wood and stone, arranged like charms against a judgment that would one day come. And still the villagers whispered. They whispered of coffins that should not have closed, of relics that should not have been held, and of the weight those coffins carried, long after the mourners had gone. Because when soil presses against wood, it does not forget, and when relics are buried with the unworthy, neither does the earth. The last entry in the parish record trails into blank space. The ink fades. The page is left half empty, as if the writer could not bring themselves to finish, or as if the pen had been taken from their hand. And in that silence, one truth remained. The relics were not lost. They were waiting, beneath the hill, beneath the Dunmores, waiting for the day when the earth would no longer hold them, and the coffins would open. The camera moves slowly through shadow. The light is dim. A cradle sits in the corner of a room. Its wood is dark, worn, carved with symbols not meant for children, and inside, a newborn stirs. It is the year 1712. The Dunmore estate has stood only a generation, its walls still raw with the stones of the ruined chapel. The family has grown proud of what they have taken, proud of what they have hidden, and with this pride comes expectation, the birth of a son. The midwives remember the night clearly. The air inside the house was heavy, despite the fire burning low. Candles sputtered, shadows leaned against the walls, and in the silence, a child came into the world. But something wasn't right. The baby did not cry. His chest moved, his fists clenched, his eyes opened, but no sound left his lips. The room filled with confusion, then fear. The midwives pressed their ears close, waiting for the wail that should have come. But there was only silence. It was then they saw his mouth. The tongue was fused, not cleaved, not scarred, fused. The midwives whispered prayers. The mother turned her face. The father's jaw tightened. And yet, even as panic spread, the Dunmores insisted the child was blessed, because in his cradle lay a relic, a jawbone, the bone of a saint, its teeth still intact, its surface polished by time. The family had placed it there before the birth, a charm against sin, a promise that the child would speak only truth. But the truth never came. The boy's silence became his mark. He grew, but he never spoke. Priests were summoned from the parish. They examined him. They touched his lips, pressed their fingers gently against the hardened flesh of his tongue. They shook their heads, and they warned the family. Relics were not meant for this. A relic was for veneration, not for possession, not for cradles. The priests urged the Dunmores to stop, but the family did not stop. They doubled their rituals. They told themselves the silence was holy, that the boy's muteness was not a curse, but a sign. They began to place relics in every cradle that followed, in every bed, in every coffin. The priests begged them to stop desecrating the bones of the dead, but the family no longer listened. The mute child grew under their gaze. His eyes were watchful, his steps careful. He never laughed. He never wept. He never called for his mother. His silence filled the rooms of the estate, until even servants forgot the sound of children's voices. Some said he made noises in the night. Not cries, not words, but low, guttural sounds, pressed in his throat like breath forced through stone. Servants swore they heard them echo through the halls, scraping, unnatural. They refused to pass his door after sundown, and that's when they saw it. The jawbone was never removed. Year after year, it stayed in the boy's chamber, resting in cloth at the foot of his bed, sometimes moved, sometimes shifted, always present, as though the family believed its weight anchored the child to holiness. But the priests who visited saw something else. They saw a boy silenced by stone, a relic that had once belonged to a martyr, now bound to a child who had never spoken. And they began to whisper. The curse had begun. One priest recorded his visit in the parish ledger. He described the boy's stare, how it lingered, unblinking, fixed on the mouths of those who spoke around him, as if he was memorizing their words, as if he longed to hold them. Another wrote of the sound he heard while kneeling to pray in the chamber, a faint clicking, not from the boy, but from the jawbone, teeth striking teeth. He left before finishing his prayer. The family ignored these warnings. They grew bolder. More relics were taken. More were hidden in the estate. The mute child became a symbol of their devotion. He was paraded at gatherings, dressed in silk, his silence offered as proof of holiness. But the village saw it differently. They saw a child denied the simplest grace of life. They saw a relic stolen from a martyr, now fused into the fate of an innocent. And they whispered. The Dunmores had not been blessed. They had been warned. As the boy aged, his silence became unbearable. He followed his parents with a steady gaze, never breaking it. He lingered at the edge of rooms, always listening, never speaking. Servants claimed that when he was angry, he did not shout. He only breathed, deep and steady, until the room felt small, until others left in haste, unsettled by a soundless pressure. The relic remained, always near, always watching with him. When he turned 12, a priest returned to the estate. He found the boy kneeling before the jawbone, his hands pressed against it, his head bowed low, as though in prayer. But no words passed his lips, only silence. The priest fled that night. He wrote one final line in the record. Their relics had begun to answer them. But the family still did not listen. They doubled their rituals. Coffins grew heavier, cradles more crowded. The estate became a reliquary not of saints, but of desecration. And the mute child remained at its center. He lived into adulthood, silent, watchful, carrying the relic of a saint's jawbone as though it were his own inheritance. But the villagers knew what it meant. A curse had been planted in the house, not by enemies, not by strangers, but by the Dunmores themselves. And it had begun with a child who could never speak, the boy who listened, the boy who breathed, the boy who bore the first curse. A corridor stretches into shadow. The floorboards groan beneath the weight of time, and behind the walls the voice waits. It begins quietly, a whisper, faint, almost swallowed by the draft that drifts through cracks in the stone. The house at Dunmore has stood for decades. Generations of the family have moved through its halls. Servants have scurried in silence, but one, a maid named Elsbeth, remembers something that others never dare mention. She spoke quietly. In court, records later smuggled past the family's influence. Her testimony describes nights spent with fear pressing against her ribs, her candle flickering, her body tense. She writes of the crypt, beneath the estate, where the coffins of Dunmores and their hoarded relics lie. She heard chanting. At first, she thought it was a wind, the walls groaning under the weight of stone, the pipes carrying water through the estate. But it was not. It was voices, hollow voices, answering back from the coffins. And that's when she heard it. She could not understand the words. Latin, perhaps. Old prayers, broken and repeated. A rhythm that pressed against the bones of the house. Slow, steady, deliberate. Her own heart began to match the cadence. She describes lying awake for hours, listening as if the house itself breathed the sound. The chanting moved from one end of the crypt to another. It rose and fell like waves. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps. No one ever walked in the crypt, but the voices followed her, even into the hallways above. She wrote that the echoes climbed walls, slid through floorboards, pressed against doors she had shut. But something wasn't right. The chanting was not alone. It spoke, or, more precisely, it answered whenever a single note was uttered. Another rose from beneath, hollow, metallic, like a reflection of sound made from wood and bone. Sometimes it mimicked her footsteps, the clatter of a tray she carried. Sometimes it mimicked speech. She dared not speak aloud, because the voices would not stop. She began to pray in whispers, low prayers, Hail Marys and Our Fathers. But the voices in the crypt never ceased. Sometimes they seemed to respond. Sometimes they seemed to grow impatient. She remembered one night in particular. The candles burned low. She had just finished her chores and began to descend the stairs leading to the servants' quarters. The chanting grew louder, sharper. She paused, and then she saw it, a shadow moving beneath the floorboards. Not a person, not a figure, but a darkness that shifted with the rhythm of the chanting. It seemed to rise from the crypt itself, pressing upward into the hall. She ran, but even in her flight, the chanting followed. Later, in court, she described how the voices seemed almost alive. They were not spirits. She insisted, not ghosts, not angels, not demons. They were echoes of human devotion turned inward, a repetition of prayer twisted by possession. And the family did nothing to stop it. In fact, they encouraged it. Elsbeth writes of the Dunmores lowering more coffins into the crypt, sealing them, lining the walls with relics. The chanting would rise from the stone as if pressed from these additions. She swore she could hear faint whispers even when alone in the attic, a thread of sound running through the estate, a reminder that the crypt waited, watching, answering. The villagers called the estate silent, but Elsbeth knew the truth. It was only silent above ground. Below, life had been replaced with sound, not comforting sound, not worshipful sound, but a mechanical echo of devotion pressed into stone, wood, and bone. She recorded in her testimony that she could feel it. When she passed the crypt's sealed doors, the air changed. Heavy, cold, pressed against her chest. Her limbs tingled. Her teeth ached. The voices were not just heard. They were felt, and that's when she understood. They were alive. Not alive in flesh, not breathing, but alive in their persistence, in their hunger for repetition, for response. And in that realization, terror took root. She began to avoid the halls at night. She left trays unfinished. She stole away before sunset. but the chanting continued. Even as she lay in the servants' dormitory, she heard it, soft, low, insistent, the crypt answering back. Hollow voices that refused to stop. The priest called her accounts disturbing. Some doubted her. Some claimed imagination. But the court record survived, and in them, her words tremble with the weight of witness. She spoke of doors rattling with the rhythm of the chant, of coffins shifting imperceptibly, of the air trembling as if some pulse ran through the stone itself. But she did not speak of seeing the dead, because the dead did not move. Only the voices did, and they were patient. She recalled one evening when she followed the sound of the crypt door. The chanting was louder than before, rising, falling, layering upon itself. She pressed her ear to the wood. She could make out fragments of prayer, names repeated, responses, not conversation, but dialogue, and she felt a shiver crawl up her spine. She wrote later, in a letter smuggled from the estate, that it was as if the coffins themselves had learned to speak, to answer, and that's when she heard it, not from above, not from beside her, from beneath, a single, deliberate word, and the floor vibrated. She fled. The family dismissed her complaints. They told her that the crypt was sacred, that the chanting was holy, that she did not understand devotion. But the villagers, when they heard her story, turned pale. Mothers tucked children closer. Men shook their heads. They recognized the sound of something corrupted, something pressed into stone. And Elsbeth knew she would never sleep peacefully again. She knew that the house did not simply hold the dead. It held their echoes, and those echoes could answer. The court files end abruptly. Her final entry, smudged with tears and candle smoke, reads simply. They speak, even through the walls. And no one hears them but me. And in that moment, the house itself seems to inhale, as if it waits. For her, for the next witness, for the world to listen. A gray fog hangs low over the village. Chimneys belch thin smoke. The streets lie empty. It is 1720. A plague has come to the valley. Fever, swelling, and coughs sweep to the homes like wind through wheat. The villagers are caught unprepared. They stumble from door to door, seeking help that does not exist. And then the Dunmore estate closes. The gates clang shut, heavy wood, iron-bound, bolted from within. No one enters. No one leaves. Inside, the family gathers their relics. Bones of saints, fragments of altars, crucifixes, and jawbones from plague victims are carried from chest to room. Candles line the floors. Cloths are draped. Prayers are whispered, muttered, repeated. Every object is placed as if it could form a shield against the sickness pressing down on the village. And something wasn't right. The village dies outside their walls. Neighbors, friends, livestock, children, mothers, and fathers all succumb to fever, coughing, and delirium. The wind carries the cries, the moans, the gasps, but the gates of the estate remain sealed. Inside, the Dunmores are untouched. They move through the halls in silence. They sleep in beds layered with relics. They dine on food left in untouched baskets. Their skin remains unmarked. Their breathing steady. The villagers whisper through cracked windows. They shout prayers into the fog. They blame the family. They curse the house. But the family does not appear outside. When the plague passes, no one is left to bury the dead. The village is empty. Smoke rises from collapsed homes. Doors hang open. Animals roam free. And then, months later, the Dunmores emerge. They walk down the hill in a line, orderly, silent. The estate doors swing behind them. Dust swirls in the morning sun. But something is wrong. Their eyes do not look alive. They stare forward, unblinking, hollow. Servants later recalled that their steps made no sound. Their shadows seemed wrong, too long, too thin. Children who had wandered to the hill ran screaming. Adults crossed themselves. The air pressed heavy around them, as if the ground remembered the fever, the blood, the cries. But the family walked, and no one stopped them. Neighbors who survived the journey from distant towns spoke of the estate, the gates, the iron-bound doors, the candles inside that burned for months without flame faltering. Some said they saw shadows move behind windows, slow, deliberate. Others claimed the family spoke to each other in low voices, almost chanting, almost humming. But the words never reached the ear, only vibration. And that's when he heard it. A traveler who came to check the ruins claimed he heard chanting from within, hollow voices, repeating, answering back. But when he approached, the doors were empty, the estate silent. Inside, the Dunmores carried on their rituals. Each coffin in the crypt was checked, relics replaced, candles relit. Even the mute child, now a young man, was present. He knelt in front of a jawbone, pressing hands against it, his eyes unblinking, staring at the bone as though it were a living thing. The villagers' deaths were never questioned. No records were kept. The church whispered, but nothing official was written. Even priests who tried to intervene reported a strange paralysis when they approached the estate. The plague seemed to recognize the house. The disease passed around it, as if compelled by unseen rules. Other houses crumbled under illness, but Dunmore stood untouched, a bastion of deathless protection. And yet, the family was not alive. They moved, they ate, they spoke in gestures, but their flesh carried the pallor of the deceased. Their eyes were voids. The energy that once filled human life had been replaced with something else, a quiet obedience to the relics. Visitors said the estate smelled faintly of iron and decay, not the rot of corpses, but the scent of blood pressed into stone, mingled with incense and candle smoke. They said it clung to the skin, to hair, to breath. One servant later recounted hiding in the pantry. From there, she could see the family as they processed relics across the floor. She described the movement as ritualistic, mechanical, not human, but still they were untouched by plague, and no one understood why. The church, powerless to act, recorded only observation, notes about empty villages, notes about the estate, notes about eyes that no longer reflected life. It was as if the Dunmores had traded something essential. Survival, yes, but at the cost of something greater. Something that once made them human. The estate itself seemed to feed off their silence. Candles burned low, but never extinguished. Shadows lingered longer than they should. The wind avoided certain halls. Doors resisted being opened. Floors groaned, but no weight passed over them. And the family walked through it all untouched, until one day they stopped at the edge of the village where no one remained to witness. They turned their gaze toward the hills beyond, and their eyes, those hollow eyes, seemed to look through time itself. It was the first sign that the house had changed them, that surviving plague did not preserve life. It had taken it, and in the silence of the empty streets, the wind whispered the truth. The plague had passed, but the curse remained. The Dunmores walked on, and no one followed. A faint mist lingers over the estate. The grand hall stretches into shadow, chandeliers swaying ever so slightly. It is 1784. The Dunmore estate has grown larger, taller, heavier with stone. Windows glint faintly with candlelight. The air smells of wax, polished wood, and dust that has never left the walls. A wedding is underway. The daughter of the house stands at the center of the hall, draped in silk, her hair coiled in careful ringlets. Guests fill the room, their whispers rolling across polished floors. Servants hover at the edges, balancing trays of wine, bouquets, and silver. The ceremony begins. A hush falls. The priest opens a book. Words are spoken in measured rhythm. The vows, carefully memorized, echo softly against the stone. The bride and groom face one another, eyes bright, hands trembling, hearts full of hope or fear or both. But something wasn't right. The floorboards shift. A low rumble rises from beneath the hall. Not the sound of footsteps, not the sound of wind. Something deeper. Something that presses against the soles of the feet, the ribs, the teeth. A vibration that climbs through the bones of those present. The priest hesitates mid-sentence. Guests murmur, unsure if the noise is part of the building or something else. Candles flicker. Shadows dance along walls and ceilings. Then, in an instant, they extinguish. The hall falls into darkness. Gasps fill the air. Guests clutch each other. The bride's dress rustles. The priest's book lies open, unreadable and black. Only the scent remains. A faint tingle of smoke, wax, and something coppery. And that's when he heard it. A whisper, low, pressed against the walls, rolling beneath the floorboards. Hollow, repeating, not words, but cadence. Not prayer, not song, not human. The family remains calm. The bride, her eyes wide, does not scream. The groom presses his hand to hers, but she does not move. She only stares. The guests begin to flee. One man trips. A tray shatters. Wine spills. Candle holders clatter against stone. And still, the whispering continues. The priest tries to continue. His voice cracks. The words fail. The air is thick, heavy, and almost wet. Every footstep sounds wrong. Every breath feels stolen. The marriage does not stop. It cannot. For 3 days, the estate is alive with ceremony. Music, laughter, whispers. Guests eat. Guests sleep. Guests pray. But they never leave. And those who attempt to do so are found wandering the halls at night, confused, murmuring to themselves, unaware of the passage of time. The family moves through it all with practiced detachment. They carry trays, lift glasses, speak in muted tones. The bride does not sleep. The groom barely eats. Their hands are pale, unbroken. The relics of the house sit at every corner. Bones, crucifixes, fragments of altars polished and arranged. Servants whisper that the floor itself hums beneath the guests' feet, that it answers the rituals of the family, that it remembers the past, remembers the vows, remembers the relics buried beneath the estate. And those who witness it, they cannot forget. Some guests describe seeing shadows behind walls, figures moving just out of reach of the candlelight. They claim to hear chanting from rooms above and below, in perfect counterpoint to the family's actions. Hollow voices, not human, not alive. By the 3rd day, the air is thick with fear. Guests' faces pale. Their voices grow uncertain. Hands tremble. Some pray aloud. Others sit quietly, staring at the floorboards, hearing the faint hum of sound that is not coming from anywhere they can see. And still, the family remains untouched. When the final day ends, the estate is emptied of outsiders. The bride and groom are left alone with their family. The doors are shut. The candles burn low, but never die. The whispers continue beneath the stone. The marriage itself lasts only 3 days. Afterward, those who witnessed it leave changed. They do not speak of the vows, the music, or the wine. They speak only of the darkness, the hum, the pressing sense that the house itself was alive, that it had watched them, that it had measured their hearts. The Dunmores continue as before, calm, silent, unblinking, their eyes hollow, reflect nothing but the rhythm of the estate. Guests never return. Servants speak in hushed tones of floorboards that shift without reason, shadows that do not belong, and whispers from relics buried deep beneath the house. The priests refuse to bless the hall. They refuse to enter. They call the estate unclean. But the Dunmores do not care. They move on with their lives. They carry relics. They preside over ceremonies. They eat, sleep, and walk among their own, untouched. And the house listens. The relics buried beneath, the vaults filled with bones, the floorboards that rumble with memory, all respond. The hollow wedding leaves its mark, not on the bride, not on the groom, not on the guests, but on the house itself, and in the shadows that linger behind every door. Because some vows cannot be broken, some echoes never fade, and some marriages last far longer than the people within them. A lantern swings slowly through darkness. The walls of the Dunmore estate rise, cold and silent, as if aware of the visitor entering. It is 1822. A priest has arrived. Father Anselm carries a satchel of tools, keys, and written orders. He is not here for ceremony. He is here for reclamation. The relics of the Dunmore family, bones, fragments, crucifixes taken from the church, must be returned, burned, buried, or secured. He approaches the vault. Heavy doors, iron-bound, bolted, resisting the push of his hand. The stone beneath his feet hums faintly. A draft carries the smell of dust, wax, and decay, and something wasn't right. The first step into the vault reveals rows of coffins, each lid polished, each relic placed with meticulous care. Candles burn low, though no one has lit them. Shadows cling to corners like living things. Father Anselm sets down his satchel. He kneels. He begins his notes, careful, methodical. Vault is described. Coffins numbered. Relics present in varying states. Bones, crucifixes, fragments of altars, jawbones. Too many to catalog easily. He pauses. The air grows colder. His breath visible in the dim light. A vibration, subtle at first, shakes the floorboards. And that's when he heard it. A sound rises from beneath. Not the shifting of stone. Not the sigh of wind through cracks. Chanting. Low. Mechanical. It echoes. Answers. Responds. Father Anselm freezes. The sound is too structured. Too deliberate. He lifts the lantern. Shadows twist unnaturally. Candles flare and die. He writes again. His pen scratches the paper with urgency. Voices responding to my prayers as if they pray back. The words trail. Margins are filled with shorthand, trembling notes. He opens a coffin. A relic rests inside. A bone polished by time. A crucifix mottled with age and unspoken blood. He lifts it gently, feeling the weight of devotion twisted into possession. The chanting grows louder, surrounds him, moves beneath him, around him. He glances at the vault walls. They seem to pulse, breathe, listen. His pen shakes. Do they speak? No, not speak. Respond. They answer. A sudden clatter. Coffins shift. He spins. Lantern tilts. Shadows dance like fingers across stone. And still, the chanting. Father Anselm attempts a prayer. Voice low, deliberate. A plea. A call for the church. But the vault responds. Answers. Not with words, but with rhythm. The sound presses into his chest. Into his bones. Into his mind. The air grows thick. Every inhale tastes of wax, iron, and dust pressed into centuries of ritual. He writes frantically. Relics, too many too. They answer back. I cannot. I must. And then silence. No scratching of pen. No movement. No breath. The page remains open. Margins note only one phrase, scrawled in the hurried hand of terror. They pray back. Weeks pass. Searches are made. No trace of Father Anselm. No lantern. No satchel. No body. Only the vault doors bolted, still humming faintly with unseen rhythm. Villagers speak of lights flickering in the windows of the estate at night. Shadows moving behind stone. A low chant, barely audible, rising from the earth beneath. Some claim they can hear Father Anselm's voice carried beneath the vault, repeating prayers in broken rhythm, joined by answers, hollow, metallic, insistent, and the Dunmores remain, calm, silent, watching, hollow-eyed, unmoving. The church hesitates. Attempts to reclaim the relics fail. Nothing can breach the vault. Candles burn endlessly. Shadows press against walls. Floorboards vibrate, and the vault itself seems aware of every movement, every breath, every prayer offered within its doors. The final note in Father Anselm's journal hints at understanding. Not fear, but knowledge. They pray back. Not merely relics, not merely the dead, but the house, the vault, the bones, the objects pressed into devotion, into possession, into something beyond human understanding. And in the quietest moments, when the estate is still, one can imagine the response. A hollow echo rising from stone, from coffin, from relic, answering, always answering. The priest is gone, but the voices remain. And those who enter the vault never return the same. The Dunmore estate continues, silent, alive, listening, waiting. A low sun rests over the hills. Shadows stretch across the fields. The earth seems still, but beneath, something waits. It is 1831. The Dunmore estate looms above the village, its stones dark and heavy. Windows glint faintly, though no lights are lit. The wind carries the smell of wet soil, wood, and something older, deeper. Villagers speak in whispers. They say they saw a son of the Dunmore family. carried from the house in a coffin. The coffin was small, sealed tight, and across its chest lay a Bible, nailed in place. The pages were closed, the cover pressed down as though to contain something within, and something wasn't right. The procession moved slowly across the hill, down toward the burial ground. Villagers watched from windows and hedges. Their eyes were wide. Their children clutched skirts and hands. Even the men turned their heads. The Dunmores carried the coffin with solemn precision, every step measured, every footfall muffled. And yet the boy inside moved, a faint scratching. Not nails, but fingertips pressing against wood, against earth, against the pages of the Bible. Some villagers swear the sound was barely audible. Others say it filled the valley. The rhythm of desperation, slow, relentless, impossible to ignore. And that's when he heard it, a muffled cry, or maybe a breath, pressed from within the coffin. A sound that carried the weight of a body trapped, alive, and aware. The priest overseeing the burial hesitated. He muttered a prayer. The Dunmores ignored him. The boy was lowered into the grave. Soil fell on wood, wood pressed against Bible. Bible pressed against chest. Silence, for a moment, but the villagers could hear it still. Scratching, faint at first, then louder. A slow tapping against the coffin lid, against the soil, against the understanding of everyone present. Children whimpered. Women crossed themselves. Men clenched fists. But the Dunmores watched calmly, eyes hollow, silent, unblinking. The scratching continued at night, for weeks. From beneath the hill, beneath the soil, a rhythmic, uneven tapping. Some say it formed words, not in Latin, not prayer, but a sound that mimicked the rhythm of speech. And that's when they understood. The boy was alive. The Bible had not saved him. The nails had not silenced him. The earth had not claimed him. The Dunmores had not acted in error. They had acted in ritual. And the ritual demanded suffering. Servants later swore the family never spoke of the event. They carried on with meals, ceremonies, and daily life as though nothing had happened. But at night, the estate seemed to vibrate. Floorboards groaned. Walls pulsed. And sometimes faint scratching came from the ground beneath the house. Some who tried to investigate the grave reported a hollow feeling, a low pressure, a sound pressed against the chest. Eyes watering, ears ringing, heart racing. They fled. They never returned. The village itself grew silent. Curiosity turned to fear. Parents kept children close. No one approached the hill at night. Priests hesitated to consecrate the ground. Candles would flicker and die. Incense would hang heavy, never dispersing. And the Dunmores watched, always watching. The boy's fate became a story whispered in corners. Not a warning, not a tale of morality, but a memory of sound, of movement beneath earth, of persistence that outlasts the living. Some claim that even years later, travelers passing the estate heard tapping, scratching, a rhythm that pressed against imagination, against reason, against the understanding of human life and death. And the Dunmores remained untouched, calm, hollow. The earth had claimed no one. The boy beneath it had not perished. But his cries, his tapping, his desperate movement became part of the estate, part of the family, part of the memory pressed into stone, wood, and blood. And the villagers learned what the Dunmores had always known, that some scripture could not save, that some nails could not bind, that some children could survive buried. But survival in the Dunmore estate came at a price. The hollow echo beneath the soil was not just a sound. It was a presence, a witness, and it would remain, always beneath the earth, always listening, always answering. A gray mist clings to the hillside. The estate looms massive and silent, like a tomb carved from stone. By the late 1800s, the Dunmore house had become more mausoleum than home. Windows were bricked, their glass long gone. Doors were bolted from the inside, as if the air itself might be kept out. The garden had grown wild. Ivy crept up walls, clinging to mortar and stone, reaching for cracks as if to hold the house together. No one entered willingly, and no one left to tell the story. Inside, the family moved in near total silence. Their eyes, hollow from generations of ritual, observed everything, their footsteps muffled by thick rugs, their hands careful, their speech minimal. Words were unnecessary. The relics did all the talking. Bones, crucifixes, fragments of altars, all placed with precise devotion. Candles burned low, their flames bent as if by unseen breath. But something wasn't right. Servants had long abandoned the estate. Fearful of what the family had become, villagers spoke of seeing shadows moving behind brick windows, hearing faint chants from the roofline, the air vibrating with the rhythm of devotion pressed to obsession. And that's when he heard it. A local farmer, who approached the hill one evening to collect wood, paused at the base. The wind carried a low murmur, not carried by air, but from within the stone. Voices, chants, whispered prayers, responding to themselves, echoing in empty halls where no one could be seen. Inside, the family prepared for a final ritual. They lined the vaults with relics, arranging each item as if it were a body to be honored. They began sealing themselves into coffins, each lid nailed tight, the air thick with the scent of wax and dust. Some were led by the eldest son. Others followed silently, eyes vacant, hands trembling only slightly. The family believed salvation required silence. The living world was corrupt, the breath of others contaminated. Only the stillness of stone, the weight of relics, the hush of burial could bring them closer to grace. The coffins descended into the crypts. Candles were placed beside them. A soft chant filled the halls, rising and falling in counterpoint with the family's final movements. Outside, the hill grew colder. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. The wind whispered through cracks in bricked windows, carrying fragments of voices to the distant village. Months passed. No smoke from chimneys. No footprints in snow. No lights. Only the occasional, faint vibration felt in the soil, an echo of human life pressed into ritual. A traveling priest recorded his observation. The house has ceased to breathe, yet it hums, a low chant, endless, as if the walls themselves pray. Visitors who dared approach spoke of brick doors trembling, of floorboard humming, of shadows behind stone. And some claimed that on rare nights, the faintest light could be seen moving behind the masonry, tracing the outline of figures moving slowly, deliberately. The family, it seemed, had achieved their final descent, into stone, into silence, into relics. But the estate did not die. It waited. It listened. It carried the rhythm of the chants within its walls, the cadence of devotion twisted into obsession. Anyone near the hill could hear it, if only for a moment, before the wind and distance swallowed the sound. And the villagers, those who survived long enough to speak of it, they called it cursed, because they believed the Dunmores were still alive, though trapped, breathing through relics, praying from within coffins, eyes hollow yet aware, waiting for the next witness, waiting for the world to remember. No one dared enter, no one dared speak, and the hill remained, a mausoleum, a tomb, a house of relics and silence. The wind whistles through cracks in stone, shadows twist behind brick windows, and in the silence, one can almost hear the prayers rising, answering. Always, the Dunmore estate no longer belonged to the living. It belonged to the echoes, to the relics, and to the family who had buried themselves within. A gray haze settles over Dunmore Hill. The estate stands abandoned, its stone walls weathered, windows dark, and doors brick-tight. It is the 1960s. Archaeologists arrive with equipment, cameras, notebooks, and lanterns. The air smells of earth, rain, and something older, something pressed into stone. The crypt beneath the house is reopened. A team of men and women descends a narrow staircase. Dust rises with each step. Their lanterns illuminate carved stone walls. Niches hold the remnants of centuries. The air is thick, musty, yet carries a faint scent of incense, long extinguished. And something wasn't right. The coffins inside the vault are arranged precisely. Each lid, intact but worn, shows signs of careful placement. Rosaries drape across the edges. Chalices sit on pedestals of stone. Bones peek through gaps. The team opens the first coffin. Skeletal hands clutch a chalice. Rosary beads are woven through ribs. Crucifixes, are fused into clavicles. The body is human, and yet altered, as though devotion, obsession, and ritual have fused flesh and relics into one. And that's when he heard it. A faint scratching from beneath the stone. Not nails, but an insistence. A rhythm pressed into vibration. The team freezes. Lanterns swing. Shadows stretch across walls like fingers. Inside the coffins, every Dunmore family member lies in a pose of devotion. Hands pressed to chest, holding relics. Fingers wrapped around crucifixes. Eyes long gone. Mouths sealed by time and ritual. The lead archaeologist begins notes. His hand trembles as he writes. Coffins numbered. Bones fused with objects. Rosaries and chalices bound into skeletal hands. No decomposition beyond what is natural. Placement deliberate, ritualistic. Signs of fire and wax, decades old. Coffins aligned with floor tiles, all facing east. One assistant opens another coffin. The lid creaks. Dust falls. A ribcage cradles a rosary like a heartbeat. The spine curves unnaturally around a silver chalice. Fingers, fragile and brittle, grip it tightly. A low vibration echoes through the vault. The team hears whispers, not in language, not speech, but the cadence of prayer, rising and falling, pressing against the walls and stone. They exchange glances. No one moves. And then faint scratches. From beneath, from the soil, from the very foundation of the house. Some claim they saw shadows moving beneath the coffins, shapes impossible to track. Lanterns flickered, candles and niches sputtered, as if gasping. The sound of movement echoed in the vaulted chamber. The lead archaeologist writes furiously. Objects and bones have fused. The living architecture of devotion. They have become part of the ritual. The house, it is responding. Do not proceed without caution. But curiosity drives them further. They open every coffin. The pattern repeats. Each body, each relic intertwined. Chalices pressed to rib cages. Rosaries threaded through phalanges. Bones shaped to hold symbols of faith. Every detail precise. Calculated. Intentional. The team feels the weight of centuries pressing down. Every breath tastes of wax, iron, and earth. Their hands shake. Lanterns illuminate the hollow eyes of skeletal remains. The walls echo with the faintest murmur of memory. And then a shift in the air. The crypt feels alive. The vibration beneath the floor grows stronger. Not wind, not earth settling, but pressure, a rhythm, a pulse, a response to human intrusion. One assistant drops a lantern. Glass shatters. Shadows leap. Everyone flinches. The vibration slows, pauses, resumes in uneven tempo, almost like a heartbeat. The lead archaeologist writes again, hand unsteady. They prayed, and now they respond. The relics, the bones, the house, it answers. Not in words, not in song. In motion, in rhythm, in presence. We should leave. But leaving feels impossible. The stairwell seems farther than before. The walls press closer. Shadows stretch unnaturally. Outside, wind rattles the brick windows. Inside, the crypt vibrates with a low, incessant rhythm. The team hears faint scratching beneath the coffins, like fingernails pressing against wood, against bone, against devotion. The last notes in the archaeologist's journal are erratic, trembling, objects and bones fused. They are to where? Responding. The pulse, not mine, not human. They. And then silence. The cameras record only empty coffins. Dust settles. The lanterns die. The team emerges days later. Their expressions pale, eyes hollow. Some refuse to speak of what they saw. Others whisper shapes moving beneath the coffins, of rhythm, of presence. The crypt is resealed, bricked, locked, and yet the relics remain fused to bone. Chalices clutched by skeletal hands. Rosaries woven through rib cages. The family, in death and devotion, remains present, waiting. The hill above is quiet, but sometimes just before dawn, the faintest scratching can be heard through the soil. A reminder, that the Dunmores, their relics, and their devotion are still there, still responding, still listening to dense fog drifts across the rolling hills of Dunmore, muffling the world beneath a heavy, gray shroud. The estate rises above the landscape, massive and immovable, like a monument to centuries of obsession. Its bricked windows stare blankly at the valley below. The ivy clinging to the wall seems almost alive, twisting and thickening with each gust of wind. Every stone hums faintly in the shifting air. Present day, a team of paranormal researchers arrives, cameras strapped to shoulders, recorders in hand. Their boots press into mud softened by days of rain. The wind carries a faint, lingering smell of earth, damp stone, and something far older, something pressed into the mortar of the walls, into bones of the estate itself. The front doors are locked tight. Rusted hinges groan when forced. The side entrance gives under careful hands, revealing a dark corridor that seems to exhale centuries of silence. Inside, the air is cold, heavy with dust and decay. Floorboards creak beneath their feet. Lantern light slices through darkness, illuminating stone walls, brick niches, and a faint glimmer of relics pressed into floors and shelves. The entire house feels alive in a subtle, almost imperceptible way. And something wasn't right. The team descends into the crypt beneath the house. Concrete steps lead downward into darkness, so thick it seems to press against the chest. Lanterns illuminate stone, coffins, and long-abandoned relics. The smell of wax, soil, iron, and something sharper, metallic and organic, hangs in the air. The silence is nearly complete, broken only by soft creaks and the rhythmic tap of boots against stone. Recorders are set. Cameras sweep across the vault. Every coffin is documented. Every carved stone noted. The team notices subtle shifts in shadow, the way the walls seem to breathe, the way the floor vibrates faintly beneath them. And then they hear it, a low, rhythmic chant, almost imperceptible at first. It rises and falls, too ordered to be random, a cadence pressed into the very stone. And that's when he heard it. One of the researchers freezes, hand on a recorder. The sound rises slightly in pitch, then falls. It is not prayer. It is speech. Patterned, deliberate, insistent. The team records for hours. They whisper to one another, careful not to disturb the rhythm. Footsteps echo unnaturally. Shadows stretch in impossible angles across the walls. Lanterns flare and dim without wind. One camera captures movement behind them, light reflecting off an object, but no one is there. When the tapes are later played back, a horrifying realization emerges. The chanting, when reversed, is not meaningless. It is not abstract. It is a language of obsession, of ritual pressed into time. It is names, every syllable precise. The Dunmore family tree, recited in full, from the earliest known ancestor to the most recent child, each name spoken with a cadence of centuries-long devotion, names repeated, as if the voices of the dead themselves are enunciating each syllable from the walls, from the coffins, from the soil. The researchers listen, rapt and horrified, tracing each name with trembling fingers across notebooks. Each syllable is accompanied by faint vibrations, as if the house itself reacts to acknowledgement. The final name comes. A pause. A beat. The tape snaps. Lanterns flicker violently. Shadows leap across the stone walls. The vibration beneath the floorboards rises and falls. It presses against the ribs, the temples, the skin. Faint scratching can be heard beneath the coffins. Fingernails against wood, bone, earth. The team freezes. One researcher swears she saw a figure shift among the relics. Too fast, too fluid to be human. Another feels the cold brush of breath against her neck. No one speaks. The air is thick, heavy, insistent. The lead researcher writes furiously. They prayed, and now they respond. The relics, the bones, the house, it answers, not with words, not with song, in motion, in rhythm, in presence. We should leave. But leaving is impossible. The stairwell seems farther away than before. The walls close and subtly. Shadows press against stone. The lanterns light fractures, reflecting the faintest movements behind brick niches. Outside, the fog is thicker. The wind presses against the brick windows with a low moan. Inside, the crypt hums with a subtle, insistent pulse. The faintest scratches echo from beneath coffins, persistent and purposeful, like fingernails pressed against devotion itself. Weeks later, one researcher confesses to nightmares, names spoken in low, deliberate tones, a rhythm pressed into consciousness, sleep interrupted, reality bleeding into memory. The crypt is resealed, bricked, locked, monitored, but the relics remain fused to bone. Chalices clutched by skeletal hands, rosaries woven through rib cages. Every Dunmore name remains inscribed in the cadence of stone, the rhythm of the crypt, the memory of the hill. The hill above is quiet, too quiet, but sometimes just before dawn, a faint scratching rises through the soil. A whisper, a chant, a rhythm, a reminder. The Dunmores, their relics, and their devotion are still there, still responding, still listening. The tape may have snapped, lanterns may have died, but the choir beneath the stone continues, always reciting, always answering, always waiting. Those who approach the estate never speak fully of what they hear, because to name it aloud is to invite it closer. And some names are never meant to leave the stone. The hill waits, silent, alive, watching, and the crypt beneath is singing, unceasing, unbroken, unseen. The Dunmores thought relics could carry them into heaven, but what they carried instead was never allowed to leave.